So I was supposed to introduce him and then come back and speak again, but I think I'm going to cut my remarks a little bit short because he went over a lot of what I had anticipated saying. But I'm going to pick up sort of a little bit midstream and give a little context to the book. Fort Hare was created in 1916, founded by Scottish missionaries, and it was created as a reaction to black South Africans who started to move out of South Africa to get a college education. There weren't the institutions of higher education for black South Africans, so they'd have to go to America if they wanted to study, and they come back to South Africa with notions of equality that were emanating in America at the time that did not fit in with the South African system. And so missionaries in South Africa decided that they needed to establish a university there to sort of placate the emerging black elite and curb their political aspirations, if you will. And so Fort Hare was born out of that experience. And so it wasn't created to breed all these revolutionaries. And as you see often in history, things have unanticipated consequences. So Fort Hare started as a very conservative missionary institution. Students had to go to services that were mandatory every day. They had to eat, pray, and be merry, which was what somebody told me. And by 1940 or so, the ANC Youth League was founded in Johannesburg in 1944, and by 1948 it had gotten to Fort Hare and they established a branch of the Youth League there, which was one of the most active in the country. And the activism started at that point in time, and then by the time you get to 1960, the level of activism at Fort Hare had gotten so high that the government decided they needed to take over Fort Hare because it was producing the Mandelas and Robert Sobukwe and Chris Hani and people like that. And so there was, as part of a broader policy to create ethnic universities in South Africa, the government took over Fort Hare, and it was an institution that Mandela had called, Harvard and Yale all wrapped up into one for black South Africans. And basically what happened is the government took it over and turned it into a ethnic institution only for the Xhosa ethnic group. And people had to go there. It was a university that schooled Indians and so-called coloreds and Africans and from all different ethnic groups, and it ended up, after 1960, being an institution that was stripped of that multiracial character. So before 1960, it was an example of which there are many in South Africa, not many, but of which there are others in South Africa, of communities that defied apartheid. So I'll pick up with some of these more formal remarks. So when I arrived in 1997 for the first time, it didn't take me very long to realize that apartheid had taken a tremendous toll on Fort Hare. One morning, less than a month after my arrival, I woke up to sounds of voices singing in harmony outside my hostel room. I joined my classmates as they sang of the heroism of Oliver Tambo and Umkhonto we Sizwe soldiers, imploring the administration to allow all students to register, even if they owed fees. Over and over again, we sang Siso Zabalaza, which I quickly learned means we will struggle. As I moved about campus, trying to familiarize myself with the steps to the toi-toi and the words and meanings of the accompanying songs, I was unaware that I was protesting because former students like Ambrose Makiwane had been unsuccessful in walking the same route 40 years earlier. The unsettled state of affairs at Fort Hare on my arrival in 1997 could be traced back to legislation of the late 1950s that established separate universities for South Africa's different ethnic groups, wrecking the institution that Nelson Mandela had called Harvard and Yale all wrapped up into one. Indeed, the financial, academic, and organizational problems confronting Fort Hare on my arrival were in large part a result of the 1960 government takeover that systematically tore into the fabric of the university. I actually was going to go on to talk about the Stanley Mabazela case, which was one of my favorite interviews. There was, and one of the things that Tom didn't mention is that the reason he didn't sell out his younger classmate was that he knew that if he was the one who took the blame for calling Matanzima a dog and a sellout, that the whole student body would rise up behind him and go on strike. He says to me, the moment I was expelled, every student stopped school. Not only the students went on strike, but the domestic workers stopped cooking for the people. Everything came to a standstill. Mabazela was eventually reinstated after Chris Hani, among others, led the students in protest. But others weren't so lucky. There's a long and illustrious line of Fort Hare students who were expelled because of political activity. They range from Tambo and Nelson Mandela, who clashed with missionary authorities over campus rules, to Barney Pityana and Tenjiwe Mtinso, who protested against government control of the university. Buthelezi, as we heard, was expelled for soaking the bed of a student who advocated a boycott of the Governor General's visit to campus and then attended the festivities anyway. Jeff Bakwa and Jared Modisani walked away from Fort Hare, along with 40 others, in protest against university apartheid. I was lucky to be granted unfettered access to the Fort Hare papers, which enabled me to examine detailed records of those expulsions. I also found such treasures as Robert Mugabe's application to Fort Hare. Yes, he went there, although they're not too proud of that fact these days. Z.K. Matthews' letter of resignation, hundreds of student files and minutes of university senate meetings spanning more than half a century. I spent months poring through a trove of dusty files in a cramped basement, living the history of Fort Hare through those documents that unveiled previously unknown details of a university whose past cannot be separated from that of South Africa as a whole. Just a few people I want to thank before we go back to eating and drinking and being merry without the prayer. Dean Steve Shepard for graciously allowing us to party in his home. Pamela Drayton, Lily Grossman, Alistair Wallace, and George Cermak for making everything run smoothly here. Gail Gerhardt read the entire manuscript at an early stage, and her suggestions helped me place Fort Hare in context with what was happening in South Africa as a whole. Lita Riddock spent countless hours battling large files to make the slideshow that is running on these televisions a reality. John DePonte saved the book cover when all seemed lost. Thank you. My brother Billy, the DJ. My parents for chauffeuring and shopping and not going overboard. And all of you for such an incredible show of support tonight. Thanks for coming and happy Freedom Day Eve.